So yeah, in a way, it was the problem of Xanax on college campuses is something that was personal to me. Like I had friends who got addicted to Xanax, and I was really struck by how much uh, Xanax I saw specifically in the fraternity world. I felt like I'd been, growing up in Dallas, like you get warned, like don't smoke dope, and like that was and I thought of Xanax as something that like a parent might take on a plane flight to, across the Atlantic or something. But then I got to school and it was just like this massive party drug. It was this drug that was being mixed with all these different things. And so I wanted to write a piece about that. And my editor at Texas Monthly Jeff Salomon gave really good advice. And he was basically like, you need to find a story. You don't want to just write like a trend piece about, Xanax, what is it? Who takes it? I interviewed one guy who took Xanax and now it's a piece, like, so I was like, okay, well, what is the story here? Because there's the story of the demand, all the kids who are taking it, but there's also the story of the supply. And I had one or two friends who sold dark web Xanax in college. And so I had some sense that there was this kind of crazy supply chain where you could get it online. But that's all I knew. But from doing that Vietnam story, I kind of had some sense that these drug pipelines are pretty international and where there's, that much money flying around, kind of wild things can happen. And so I was actually sitting in a cafe in Saigon and I took out my laptop and I just searched Xanax bust fraternity. And the first result was this article in the Charleston Post and Courier about these guys who had been caught, mostly fraternity guys, with grenade launcher, some cocaine, some weed, a few cars, and 40,000 Xanax pills. And I thought, okay, well that's something. I mean, that's a pretty wild story. It's the first result on Google. It's like a good place to start. And I called a lawyer down in Charleston that I had read was involved in the story. And these Charleston defense lawyers, they tell a good story. And this guy kind of started telling me, oh, like you this is just the tip of the iceberg. Like the police didn't even announce the bulk of what they found. And I was like, oh, well, what else did they find? He said it was actually closer to 2 million pills, not 40,000. And also a student had been murdered and found his body was found surrounded by these fake Xanax pills. And then I had a sense that okay, this is fractaling into something much bigger. This is not a magazine piece. This is something different. I think when I started, I was 26 or 27. And I think the most productive thing you can have on your first book, and maybe on any book, I'm curious what you think about this, is this sort of productive self-delusion of being like, uh, whatever I'm doing right now is the hardest part, and once it's over, this won't be that bad. And so the first step, like you said, is like, okay, well, I got to find out who I'm going to talk to. And that's really daunting because it's like at first you don't have any court documents. You have this article. Maybe you can find a few things online. You start looking at people's Facebooks or whatever, but ultimately you don't even know who the names are. And so I kind of convinced myself this is the hardest part of writing a book. Like once I find these people's names, it's all downhill. So then you find them, it's like you said, you reach out to a defense lawyer and maybe they give you a motion that they filed, and there's going to be more names in that motion. You start going through that, and then the best intelligence is, I think, almost always human intelligence. You get someone on the phone, and they say, "Oh, well, this guy was the real like player in this node of the ring," or have you heard this story of what happened at this party? And then all of a sudden, you just so much more. But then it's like you delude yourself that the hardest part is finding their contacts because like it's actually hard to just find people out, especially people who don't have agents and managers and assistants. Like it's really hard to just find people's contacts. And so you figure that out and tell yourself that's the hardest part, and you can see where this is going. But like Then you tell yourself the interviews are the hardest part. Then you tell yourself transcribing and organizing them is the hardest part. Then you tell yourself that making the outline is, and then writing it, and then the edit, and then all the way through the last publicity interview you do, you're telling yourself this is the hard part. But then, I think if someone were to have sat me down when I was 26 or 7 and said, "Here's everything it's gonna take to write this book," I just would have thought it's impossible. Like how do you do all those things? But uh, sometimes you can be protected by your own delusions, and then you go forward. I think being a fraternity guy from the South definitely opened uh, some doors just in terms of like there is this sort of good old boy network that it's not like there's some secret handshake or something, but I think it's just sort of like even it's just funny the way this fraternity world works, but it's like even I made a LinkedIn for the book because I that was going to be my way of reaching out to people because I realized all these guys are in business now and so they all have LinkedIns. And like through my fraternity connections and my like the people I went to school with in Dallas, I often had like second or third degree connections with the people in this story on LinkedIn. So there was this like this broader network that you're just made a part of by being in that like that Greek life thing or I think that's definitely part of it. Um, but also I think a lot of the people in this story they just thought it was like this kind of crazy story that like maybe should be a book and a movie. And like it wasn't obviously there are plenty of people even to this day who have no interest in talking about it. But I found there were a lot of people who did. Um, but it took a long time. And I think one of the one of the things that really changed the calculus was when uh, some like little Hollywood Reporter article or something came out that way before the book was even written that Sony was adapting it, Sony Pictures, and all of a sudden that started making its way through the fraternity group me's at College of Charleston to the point where I think one of them had a group me that screenshotted the article, screenshot an email from me, and was like, "Brothers, like whatever you do, don't talk to this person. Like they're gonna make a book and a movie." But then all those guys saw like, "Oh my God, a movie!" And then they saw my name and they started reaching out to me out of the blue, basically like, "Hey, I would love to, tell you X or Y story." So I think, yeah, it's just that sort of I think a lot of people involved knew that it was a story that would would connect on a bigger level. I talked to a good amount of people from the ring, and some of them spoke names, some of them spoke on background, meaning I could use their stuff, but I couldn't name them, and then I would have to corroborate it through police files or some secondary interview. And then some, one or two just spoke totally off the record, and so I wasn't able to use that in the book. But the main character in the story is this guy, Mikey Schmidt, who uh, not only was involved in the sort of college drug ring of it all, but he then moved to Atlanta and got involved in the sort of Atlanta rap underground and got involved with cartel connected cocaine sources and ultimately was a pretty central part of this story from a bunch of different ways and ultimately was the only person to do serious jail time for it in spite of the amount of drugs that were flying around. And he had a secret cell phone at the time in prison. It's a crazy thing where uh, guards would smuggle in phones and then you would buy them and then guards would confiscate them. You had to buy another one. It's not happening anymore. He doesn't have a phone anymore. Um,
But
but
he would call you on on the phone.
yeah, yeah, there was a little secret kind of place I mean, he still is in awful conditions. It's a converted horse stable, over 100 years old, no air conditioning, and you're in Sumter County, South Carolina. Horse flies, heat over well over 100 degrees, super humid. But yeah, he would call, and there were cell phone blockers, so the service would be shoddy. But we just spoke for ultimately well over hundreds of hours, like really going deep. Um, and he had already paid the consequence for all this stuff, so he was willing to be named, in a way that I think a lot of the guys who got away with it uh, had more to lose, maybe. I think I was very lucky for a lot of reasons that the option agreement happened before I wrote the book, because then I could just completely put it out of mind. There wasn't the sort of like, oh, this is going to go up for auction later, and I need to juice, like write it in a three-act structure, or think of what the midpoint is, or the like screenwritery terms. Like in my mind, I was sort of like, Sony has already optioned this, and my only job is to write the best book I can. Because I think it's really dangerous to mix media like that. Like I I know some writers who do what we do, who kind of think like, oh, we're all just storytellers, and it doesn't, whether it's a podcast or a book or a movie or a documentary or a feature, like it's all just storytelling. But I really kind of I try to reject that. Like I think the medium is the message ultimately, and like the the form of a book is so radically different than the form of a movie. Just like what you can do with language versus what you can do with images. Like it's really very different. And so I really try to focus on, if when I'm writing a book, I'm focusing on what I can do with the language. Um and like, yeah, the pacing is so different in a book versus a film, and like there are so many differences. Um, but yeah, once again, I think I'm lucky. I think if the book hadn't been optioned yet, it's almost impossible not to have in the back of your mind, like, okay, well, you know, how would Hollywood respond if I did or did this or not, or something like that.